Dream 4. Soul. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. The wise old owl who sat in the tree observed all that could be seen. He had eyes which could see through the night and day, and ears which listened well to any sound that came his way. He would often take flight in the wind and glide. There were others besides him in the woods. He knew their stories. Some were lost in time, others lived in their memories. But they were not what was important to the wise owl. What made them special was their stories, their deeds, the people they had met along the way. Even the very air in the woods was theirs to smell and taste. The bird was never truly free until he had learned from each of these travelers a story worth remembering. He heard the sound of hoofbeats as horses drew nearer to the forest edge, but did not move. Not yet, anyway. If there was one thing he had learned from all these travelers, it was that one must wait until things had settled before moving forward. Hello. At least now they could see him, though they probably couldn't understand him yet, just like the other ones could not understand birds and animals. They will learn soon enough, once they have tasted my wisdom and I share mine with them. He hooted softly, and waited for the riders to get closer. Soon enough they were at the edge of the wood. It's been a long road, we know. We just hope you don't mind if we stop off here. There's nowhere else for us to go this far into the mountains. I wish I could tell you why, but I can't. I don't think anyone can explain what lies beyond these woods. One man, tall and slender but strong, dismounted and walked slowly towards the old owl, leading two tired-looking horses behind him. The owl hooted a greeting, then hopped down from his perch and landed on the horse closest to him. The horse whinnied and nudged him lightly, making him step back slightly. The man looked up and smiled when the owl hooted. Then he moved forwards again, this time staying right beside the horse. The rest of the party dismounted and tied the horses to nearby trees. We were wondering if perhaps you might know where our next destination lies? Or perhaps your wisdom might shed a light on this strange situation. He reached out a hand, and the owl took it gently. The rider pulled back his glove and pressed the palm against the owl's head. A blessing to you from the Lady Eileen's heart, the words said clearly. Then, still holding on to the owl's paw, the man turned away and led his companions deeper into the wood. The owl watched them walk off into the darkness. Finally, after watching them for a few minutes more, he followed at a distance, waiting patiently until they stopped. As the men began talking amongst themselves, he settled himself in a spot close by and closed his eyes, listening carefully to the conversation. They spoke about magic, and of magic users who could use the gift of sight. They talked of spirits and wizards who had already found their soulmate. Some called it seeing with other people's eyes, or seeing things from another person's point of view. One man explained. They claimed it was a power granted those who could do the impossible. But what really is it? He asked rhetorically, knowing full well. What good are powers like that if you can't use them to help you find happiness in life? The owl sighed. And so we come to the crux of the matter, he thought. If he didn't care too much about being able to help someone, but it wasn't as though he had no purpose in the world. He was an observer, like any other creature. If people didn't want to believe in something, or didn't want to follow its rules, well, sometimes he wouldn't intervene, and just let them do it their own way. But if there were people who wanted to believe in things they could never touch, well, they weren't going to get anywhere by ignoring all the signs around them. I don't suppose you ever hear a tale about how people have seen their soulmates, the first man continued. His friend laughed and shook his head. Well, we certainly saw ours, that's for sure. And we've got quite the tale to tell. He agreed. The three friends began to talk excitedly over each other, as they went on to describe their visions and adventures. The owl watched the conversation for only a few moments, before drifting off into sleep. It had been a long journey, filled with many obstacles and hardships. Now all he wanted was a peaceful moment's rest, before waking up again. When he opened his eyes, he felt a little confused. He was sitting outside under the stars, surrounded by the trees and wildflowers. The wind carried his scent into his nostrils, and it seemed as though his senses were heightened. His thoughts turned towards the people who had passed through this forest recently, and he wondered what their journey had been like. Were they happy? Had their lives changed? Did they miss him? A feeling of guilt rose within him. How many times had he failed to give guidance to someone who needed it? Or someone he loved? This time he vowed, however, that he would do everything in his power to assist his chosen ones. He would guide them in ways that he believed they deserved. He would help them find their soulmates, so they could live happily ever after. With these resolutions firmly in place, he lifted his head to the sky and gave a mighty screech. Instantly a chorus answered him from the treetops, the cry carrying across the landscape. 1,000 owls, together with every living animal who had ever heard his call, raised their voices to the heavens in unison. In response, the whole forest shuddered with energy. A powerful wave rolled across the land and gathered around the small group gathered beneath the oak tree. The trees began to shake, the leaves rustled overhead and fell to the ground. When it settled, the entire area was covered in a blanket of bright green grass and new leaves. After a few moments, a figure appeared, tall and slender, standing among the trees. Her black hair flowed freely around her face as she stepped into the moonlight. She looked beautiful and young, and yet the owl knew instinctively that she had the potential to become something incredible. Her face was stern and serious, and her dark brown eyes shone with emerald as she gazed across the clearing. For a moment, she stood quietly gazing, before turning her attention to the 3 travelers standing by the side of her horse. She spoke to them in clear, deep tones. "You have done me great honor. You may ask whatever questions you may need to. But first I must make my request known. If you accept it, then I will gladly answer anything you have." The 3 men nodded eagerly and stepped forward. As she spoke, the owl flew off into the trees, following the trail of light that streamed from the woman's body. With the owl by his side, the traveler spoke again. "Tell me of this mysterious place which you know, and tell me the history of our world and what it is that we hold dear." This time the owl spoke as the girl answered the question. "Our land is large and rich. Our forests spread far and wide, stretching as far as the eye can see. There are countless villages hidden within these forests, protected by ancient magic. We know that those who enter these forests often disappear without a trace, never to return. There are tales of monsters hiding in the trees, and of beasts that inhabit the lands beyond. However, this is just because most people who explore eventually do not return, as they find their love, their soulmates. These tales of fear should instead be that of love. Yet love itself creates fear. And let it be known that the fear creates love, like a weaving in time of life." Her voice faded away as the last word faded into the night air. Her companions exchanged a look, the tallest man speaking first. "If this is true, then we must hurry, lest we lose ourselves too. But we must also know if it will lead us to find our soulmate." The owl tilted his head and regarded them curiously as he listened. "We cannot wait until we find our soulmates. That is foolishness. Our search has brought us here, to this place. This was always meant to be. We simply have to discover it ourselves." The trio continued to speak among themselves, unaware of the owl's presence. Suddenly the owl hooted softly. They turned and stared up at him. He held their gaze, before turning to face the other direction once more, and walking away into the darkness. He flew slowly into the distance, circling high above in the sky, his wings fluttering gracefully behind him. When he finally stopped flying, the owl hooted once again. The trio turned their heads towards the sound, staring into the darkness. After a few moments, nothing happened, until suddenly a light flickered in the distance. The group began moving forward through the trees on the journey to find their soul. The key to 1 yen.